very excited to welcome Kareem George to the show. Kareem is the owner of Michigan's Cultural Traveler and is part of Signature Travels Network Expert Select Program for South Africa and Germany. He is also an Abercrombie and Kent Africa specialist. Kareem is here to talk about his agency and how hosting in-person and then virtual events allowed him to transform his agency and lead to bigger sales and stronger relationships with his clients. So I want to say welcome, Kareem, and thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Dan. Good to be here.
Kareem was nice enough to get into the Halloween spirit with everyone too, so it's great to see you, Kareem.
I'd be festive.
Yeah, I do appreciate it because I think as the more festive we get during the holiday seasons, the closer we're going to feel to pre-COVID times. But I think that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But I know, so I want to jump into our topic here, which is in-person and virtual events and how those events can help you succeed as a travel agent or the owner of an agency. But first, I want to ask you, I know it's most likely a long story, and I know you have a music background and you have a love of travel, but I wanted to sort of give you a couple minutes to talk about your road to becoming an agency owner.
Sure. I grew up in New York City in a musical family and studied performing arts from when I was about 8 years old. And that was really my love for most of my young life through college. And subsequently, I went to work for symphony orchestras in fundraising and marketing roles and then community relations. And that brought me to Michigan, where I am now in the Detroit area. And through that journey, I had at least a 10-year road as a performer, 10 years in administration, and I wanted to start my own business. And I was here in Detroit, and Detroit was starting its renaissance at that period, and there was just all of this energy. And I thought, well, what have been some of my other loves? And through music, I've always traveled from when I was young, whether it's going to visit family or going to recitals or master classes abroad. And I luckily had a friend in the industry who I could bounce some ideas off of. And I said, is there a space for someone like me that's very specialized in another field, but has, a background in fundraising, marketing, personal connections with people? And he said, yes. And I said, well, what could be my market? Is there a market for cultural travel? Is there a market for luxury travel? And he kind of looked at me as the novice I was at that time and said, absolutely, you should give it a go. And he introduced me to some resources, starting out with ASTA and CLIA, where I really, knew nothing and went to conferences, did trainings. And in 2013, I decided to take the plunge and submitted my articles to the Michigan government to start my company. And the rest is history. It's been a wonderful journey. I became part of Oasis Travel Network fairly early on, which, elevated my connections and training to another level, the signature relationship. So it's been a challenging road, an exciting road, but I feel very fortunate and really pleased with this new stage in my journey.
Yeah, so you mentioned luxury travel or cultural travel. Is that what your agency specializes in right now?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We're full service, but in terms of my personal knowledge, the types of trips that I really enjoy putting together, they either are culturally focused or I find a way to enhance the interpersonal connections with the guests and the destination.
So, I mean, you say culturally focused. I mean, I guess there probably isn't a typical vacation you book or a trip you book, but I mean, would you have some examples of the more popular stuff you might book on an annual basis, or some of the more reoccurring trips that are the most interested from your clients?
Yeah, sure. So South Africa is a destination that I'm a specialist in. And obviously, when people go to South Africa, they want to see wildlife, they want to taste great wine, but they also want to get a sense of the culture. And I certainly have a background and a knowledge of those basics of putting together a tour. But I think what really makes it special is me personally knowing the guides, me matching up the personality of the guest with a specific guide, prepping them beforehand so they can have some really open conversations about topics that maybe they feel uncomfortable with, whether that's apartheid or just racism, life, present day life in South Africa, etc.
Yeah, I think we could probably spend an hour talking about those kind of trips, but I do want to get into the reason we're here is to talk about sort of your experience and your ability to put on these in-person events, and to put on sort of gatherings of people that have helped you build a client list and build your relationships. First, I want to talk about sort of pre-COVID era because I know things have changed and
Mm,
changed again since March.
yes.
I know there are a lot of advisors out there who get super creative with their client outreach. But how do these gatherings help? Are you actively making sales at the events? Are you just using them to build your relationships? I guess my question is, what's your goal when you do put on one of these in-person events with your
Sure,
clients?
sure. I think early on, especially when I was new to the business, I really needed to establish a new identity, especially in my home community. I was known as a music person. I was certainly very public and did some good marketing about this new venture, but I really needed to establish that this is my new road. I'm an expert in these areas. So the events were really a fantastic opportunity to pool people together, whether that was around me, and I've done all different types of events, but introducing suppliers, introducing a destination, but really the overarching goal was to reposition myself and to establish myself as an expert, as an advisor, but also, as a person. All of these events obviously start out with an introduction where I'm acknowledging who the guests are, I'm acknowledging who the presenter is, and I talk a bit about why I'm here, why I'm presenting this particular topic, because I think it all really comes down to relationships in the end. And the better you know your clients, the better you're going to be able to propose trips for them, create and curate trips for them, and that's going to lead to referrals and growing your business.
Yeah, so I want to talk about because I know there are in-person, we're still in very much in the COVID era, but there are in-person opportunities available now to advisors. And I want to talk about your process for putting one of these on. I guess where would you typically hold these events? What kind of events would they be? Would they be sort of a cocktail hour, a dinner, all the above? Yeah, I mean, what's this process sort of like?
Sure. So I've done lots of different types of events. I personally love to host events in my home. I
Okay.
feel that when you invite someone to your home, that really is elevating a relationship. That's really very personal. And that puts more weight behind the invitation when you get an invitation to someone's home.
Yeah.
Even better is when you host in a client's home. And I've been fortunate where we've had travelers that have said, I really love that trip you put together. I really love this supplier. I have friends that I want to meet you. I will host something for you in my home. That's fantastic. I've done events in restaurants where, again, you can cross promote and you can support your local business, especially a time like now is very tricky, but pre-COVID, picking a favorite restaurant or wine bar, doing some list sharing and bringing people in there. So the venues can be really creative. Libraries, flower shops, what have you. And the process is very meticulous and detail oriented. Part of that, I think, is me. I think everyone will bring their own different expertise and focus to putting together an event, but I came from a fundraising background and a marketing background. So I've hosted and put together a lot of events. So I always start, with the theme. What's the theme or purpose? If it's a destination like South Africa, for instance, who's going to be my supplier? Who's the expert I'm bringing in to support me? What's specifically the topic? Is it going to be South Africa in general? Is it going to be wine country? So really focusing it in so you can, when you put out that invitation, give the guests really a sense of what the experience is going to be. Creating the guest list, that's always, very challenging. You don't want to, with any marketing, you want to be targeted. So you just don't want to broad brush invite everyone. I found in my personal experience too that guests tend to be more responsive when they know the events are smaller, when they know that it's special and targeted as opposed to an event for 40 or 50 people. My events typically will be 20 to 25 people.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna ask that. I mean, 20 to 25 people seem like the sweet spot. But I mean, we spoke earlier in the week, and you mentioned that the sort of the definition of events have changed, and I mean, something as small as 2 or 3 people can now be considered one of the events that
Mhm.
can lead into that
Mhm.
category.
Yeah, exactly. Especially now during COVID times, it really is a matter of personal comfort. And I certainly have had events during COVID, but they've been with groups of people who know each other,
Yeah.
or, many of us, the other advisors on this call, know about all the groups that we've had to reschedule or cancel. So those are potentially opportunities, especially if those people know each other, to try to pull people together, do something outdoors or in a venue where they're all comfortable, maybe even theme it after where they were going to go, but just to keep that engagement going, keep the relationship going.
Yeah, yeah, and so I mean, a lot of these on your home, and it's again, it's just what you feel comfortable with, how many people and who inviting into your home.
Mhm.
And then I guess the other component, my question would be the supplier component. I know you've had a lot of these events with supplier partners with you. How does that work? What's the process for sort of nailing down a supplier to partner with you on one of these events?
Mhm. I think you really have to look to your client base and the type of product or experience that best suits them, and then find that supplier. And I've always been so grateful and thankful. And I think, especially now during COVID, our supplier partners have really stepped up in terms of providing resources and accessibility. So once you decide on that supplier, then it really becomes a fun, collaborative, and creative process about what are new trends in the destination, what's actually the presentation that you're going to put together, how are you going to combine images with speaking, is there going to be a giveaway or something, what's going to be the call to action there, how are you going to orchestrate things, if you're doing a seated component to the event, who's going to sit where. So it's great, and suppliers are experts at these type of events. They know the different trends for the destinations, they know what offers are going to resonate with the consumer. And I've always been had my expectations exceeded with the supplier partnerships with events we've done.
Yeah, I think those are great because I know advisors sort of in their work as travel advisors are used to putting together events, but I mean it is something different than putting together a trip or a
Mm,
vacation. And I think it's important supplying with partnering with a supplier can sort of help you get some of those jitters out of the way. I think that's a great point.
mm,
So we have a question, and this is something I did want to just get into next. Marissa Rodriguez wants to know about sort of what's happened during COVID. Did you move to Zoom events? What was that process like, I guess? And what has happened since sort of the beginning of COVID, which I assume you did move virtually. And
mhm.
then I guess
Yeah.
my question is, did you move back? Have you moved back to in-person events since?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I was probably the only person in the world that had never done a video call before COVID. So, I'm Mr., type A, so anal with details, this whole checklist for events. And then I'm like, what am I going to do now? I have to start over. So yes, I did have to pivot and transition. And I, started by just dabbling in, the Zoom and the different video platforms. And then again, the supplier partners helped. I think with my first Zoom event that I did, we had a run through, mostly for me, not really for the supplier, but I was so freaked out. What if something goes wrong with the connection? What if people can't get through? So yes, it has moved mostly to Zoom with COVID, and the checklist has changed in terms of the preparation for the events. But what I found is a plus is that the scope of the event, the invite list can be much larger, and the possibility to get referrals from events can be larger. I think that first event that I did virtually was focused on Morocco, and we send lots of clients to Morocco every year. And we had clients scheduled to go that had to reschedule. And one of the couples said, there's another couple I'm thinking about traveling with. Can I invite them on? Sure. They had another couple. Can we invite them on? Sure. So I went from, being focused on my target audience to expanding to other areas of the country because of the technology. So um, there are benefits. I still think there's nothing like face to face, obviously,
Yeah.
but there are ways to make this platform work. And now I'm doing a combination. So to answer the other part of your question, I'm doing supplier events on Zoom, same amount of people, typically 20 to 30. But then from that, I'll do follow-ups in smaller groups with a couple or a group of couples. And then sometimes those have led to face-to-face, again, depending on how comfortable you are personally and if those clients are comfortable, but finding a place to potentially meet outdoors together to talk further. So the process has become more of a phased process.
Okay, so we do have a few questions sort of dropped into the chat. One of them is fairly practical, I guess. Helen wants to know about, did you need to do anything with your homeowner's insurance to cover yourself for liability if one of the guests gets hurt at the events?
Yeah, absolutely. Checked with our insurance company to make sure that we had that liability cover. So that's a excellent question. And
And then,
same thing, not to interrupt, Dan, but when you're
no, go ahead.
looking at venues, you want to make sure that venues you're using are going to have insurance as well.
Okay. And then Gwen wants to know, what's the largest in-person event you have done?
50, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this seems to go back to building your relationships with clients, and this is just a great way to do that and to develop a more personal relationship. I know that we spoke about that earlier in the week too, about how important relationships are. And I think we want
Mhm.
to touch on that a little later in the call. But I want to
Mhm.
ask you, because you've been hosting these for a good amount of time now,
Mhm.
do you remember the first in-person event you've done? And I guess along the way, well, what lessons have you learned, and what sort of hiccups have you had that has sort of developed into better protocols or better practices?
Oh, this could end up being a very long-winded answer, Dan.
Yeah.
Um, I think I do remember the first event I had was with a pair of cruise suppliers at my home, and lessons from that, which probably are very obvious, test the technology.
Okay.
And, I had tested the technology, but I think we had some hiccups, in particular with audio. Um, I think if there's one tip I can give when you're doing your run through, your logistic check, have people in different parts of the room in different areas, both for the sight lines and also for hearing, because when the event is happening and you have people in and they have drinks and there's more noise, there may be people in the back that are not hearing as well. So that was certainly, a takeaway. Something I've always been cognizant of is the guest list. And again, knowing your clients and knowing potentially who's going to get along with who and who's not going to get along with who. And if you're doing, say, a large cruise ship night and you're inviting small cruise clients, maybe not a great mix because you never want audience members undermining your event, so to speak. So if you know something's not a match, you don't want to potentially have someone there that's not going to have a good experience and that's going to turn off the guest to that experience. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and we have a great question coming in from Kay. He wants to know, do you or can you measure your actual return on investment from these events?
yeah,
Is there a measurable sort of, or is there a measure you can look towards and see if one was more successful than another, or anything like that you can point towards?
Yes, that is a great question. And for each event, starting with the guest list, so I put together an Excel or some sort of document with all of the guests listed. And you want to have your follow-up strategy in place, your call to action before the event. So I have columns as to what the conversation was at the event, the interaction. If there was a specific, product that they were interested in, when I sent that follow-up information, if they booked. So I am able to go back for each event to look to a document that shows, what the spend was and then what the result was, both for me and the suppliers. And I think that's where the supplier partners are great as well, because they'll come up with goals with you for the events that you can measure.
Yeah, I think that's important to look towards, especially now. If assuming a lot of advisors have limited resources, I still
Mhm.
think we actually had an advisory board member from Travel Market Report talk about how they held recently a virtual event for their clients for the Galapagos, and it was I think just because of how pent up people are now with demand, and how starved they are to travel. I think it was from what they're saying, it was extremely successful. And I think even now, even investing now, I know with budgets are tighter now, but investing now isn't the worst idea
Mhm.
advisors can have.
Yeah, I also think that you sometimes, and hopefully you will get immediate sales from events. So I've had guests literally come to an event with a catalog, with a check, ready to book with their specific questions. But also sometimes it's a process. So for those that are maybe just starting out with events, don't be discouraged if there aren't immediate bookings after, because I see both sides of the story. And I think even more so in this virtual environment, because it's easy to see something and say, yeah, I'm somewhat interested in that, and I'll attend that event. And I look now to events that I had earlier in COVID, March, April, that I'm now getting the bookings from, and that's, quite a lot. That's not instantaneous, but I can still track it directly to those earlier events.
Okay. And then, so we have one more question in the chat that I'm gonna jump back to to the script. But Florence wants to know what are the content of your virtual events, or I guess even the in-person events. How is the content sort of organized? Is it just a is it a theme party? Does it feel like a sort of a relaxed cocktail hour? And I'm assuming you let the supplier have some time to talk to the clients too. But how do you organize your events? Yeah,
Yeah.
and what's the content like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think first and foremost, you always have to be honest and transparent about the purpose. And I think that determines the content. So I've done events that are focused on villas, and I'll have a villa partner come in, and we would have talked in advance about the specific locations and the guests that have registered, because you'll have that pre-registration to look at what their interests are and making sure we hit on those. But then I've also done wine tastings where a supplier partner from overseas has been in town. And I said, I think it's important to balance the very transparent sales events with the purely social events. I think you have to have a balance of the two. So I've had wine tastings where this is a great partner that I've supported and I've worked with for 10 years, and they're in town and we're going to taste this type of wine, come over. And that's been purely social. And then I've done celebratory events for clients where it's really about bringing together your top 10, your top 20. So those travelers that have really supported your business, just to say thank you. And that can be as
Yeah.
simple as tea, or it can be a seated dinner.
Okay. Yeah, it seems to always go back to building your relationship and keeping those relationships
Mhm.
fresh. I know you said, you're not always specifically trying to make a sale at every event, and I think that's important to know too. We did have another question, which I think is super relevant. Is Shanna wants to know if you charge your guests to attend the events. Is there any situation where you charge your events, or usually you absorb the cost?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've typically not charged, but I've thought more and more about charging as I've tried to be creative with different types of events. So unfortunately, I can't give a specific example there, but
Yeah.
in terms of, what I'm thinking about for future, because of my musical background, I've not executed one, but I've been experimenting with the idea of a concert type of event where the charge maybe would just go to a charity, or maybe it would help to cover the costs. But to date, it's been again in partnership with the supplier partners, sharing costs for the event and then scaling it, going back to that earlier question, to what the anticipated ROI is. So very different projection for a cruise night as opposed to a wine tasting where it's just about having fun.
Yeah, and I think so earlier in the week we spoke and you spoke about sort of the opening. I know you're in Michigan and you spoke about sort of the state is slowly opening up, and you spoke about how you've managed to sort of make events out of gatherings where
Mm.
you saw clients at sort of social gatherings around Michigan. And yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about that? Do you want to talk about sort of making an effort to make sure if you'll be in the same place at the same time to reach out to a client, or to reach out beforehand just to let them know that this might be something you're interested in? If you want to come say hello, that'd be great.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it all depends, of course, on your personal comfort with getting out. And And for me, it varies, but I have gone to events, and I think any interpersonal connection has the potential to deepen a relationship or to generate a lead. So I've gone to birthday parties in this COVID environment where I've really just honestly gone wanting to celebrate my friend and to have a good time. And when you're in public now as a travel advisor, the minute you say you're a travel advisor, you are going to be the focus, for better or worse, you're going to be the focus of that event because everyone wants to know, what's open? How have you been managing? How's the industry? So I've found a little bit of pressure somewhat in going to events because I really need to do my homework before I'm going out to things. But, I've attended, birthday parties and small gatherings where out of those conversations, I've gotten bookings. There have been socially distanced, not now as the weather's getting colder, but outdoor concerts and things again, where you see people and you interact and you talk. And again, I think you always have to come from a sincere place of caring about the person, wanting to know how they're doing, how this has affected them. And maybe it'll come back to, a potential for a client, a referral, and booking, maybe not, but I think getting your personal brand out there is also important, building people's awareness of you and what you do.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I want to touch on that. I want to touch on sort of those conversations and how they go. But we just have another. The chat is really the chat. The questions are coming in the chat, so I do want to make sure I pay each one attention. One, so the two questions that came in, which are sort of similar, is that how often are you doing these? And I know like the world has changed.
Mhm,
But I guess how often are you doing these now? How often were you? What's the most often you were doing these? And I
mhm.
guess, how do you make those decisions?
Sure, that's a great question. The most often I was doing these, believe it or not, was like every other week,
Oh wow.
which was a lot, perhaps too much, because there's a lot of work that goes into it. In the COVID environment and with the Zoom events, the most I've done them is weekly, actually, because there still is a lot of preparation, but it's different. And if you schedule far enough out in advance, you can, knock these out and find a day that works, for your list that seems to work for your audience. But I'd say for someone who maybe is just starting out with events, try maybe for twice a year or quarterly and start out maybe with broader topics. um, Travel to Europe, travel to Africa, cruising, and then bring it in to more focused topics, because as you have the events and as you engage, you're going to be getting information each time, and that information is really going to determine what the future events are. I mean, that's what I find happening is through the conversations, you identify trends. If everyone's asking about Ireland, then maybe you should think about contacting an Ireland supplier and doing an event on Ireland. Or if everyone's talking about small ship cruising, maybe you should look to a small ship cruise partner.
I'm just curious, just because you mentioned that, what are you seeing? Are you seeing any destinations that are trending now, or any segments of travel that are particularly of interest to your clients and consumers?
Sure. Villas are trending.
Yeah, makes
So
sense.
everyone wants to be able to control the environment. They want to be together with family. They want to create their own bubble. And then I see the Caribbean trending. And Caribbean's always, been a popular destination, even for my mostly Midwestern clientele. But I think it just feels like a good first step before going all the way across the ocean. It's a
It does.
small little, dip your toe in, check it out. So I see the Caribbean trending, and then obviously Mexico as well.
Yeah, I think that's that's good to know. Those are the trends which sort of we've seen. We've seen a lot of these the past guests on these series have mentioned Mexico recently, and I think that is great news, because I know Mexico's had a couple of tough years, and it is a
Mhm,
supremely exciting destination, and it's nice to see it getting some play now.
mhm.
So we have about 15 to 20 minutes left. I want to let everyone know again, the chat is open. Please drop your questions in. I'm sort of going to shift the conversation right now, but anything with in-person events or the practical or protocol or anything like that, please drop them in, and I'm going to get to as many as I can by the end of this hour. But I mean, you mentioned it earlier, sort of talking to clients, and I want to touch upon that.
Mhm.
Um, because I know you mentioned earlier in the week that a lot of what you sort of pride yourself in is getting to know people on a more human level and sort of not being laser focused on that sales question. And I want to ask you, what's the key to having conversations with clients? I know it's a big question, but I mean, what do you think is most important? Is it always you who's bringing up the sales question? And any tips for advisors who are sort of might during these in-person events or outside of them might want to improve their conversation skills with clients?
Mhm. For me, and at least right now, and this has always been a challenge for me, I feel the key is sharing information about yourself, showing vulnerability of yourself. So I think when you're engaging with clients, with your travelers, and they ask, how are things going? You certainly don't want to be extremely negative, but you want to be measured and you want to be honest in sharing the challenges and your concerns. And I think when we show vulnerability, and again, it's been a challenge for me, especially, but when you show that vulnerability, um, it makes you human. And people will then open up to you and they share their vulnerability. I think you have to come to the engagement being willing to show yourself and then having a sincere interest in the person you're speaking with. People are intuitive, they can tell immediately if all you're seeking or looking for is a booking or a referral. You really have to come from a place of sincerity, of getting to know them, or passion for the destination or what you do. I think a lot of what's going to ultimately lead to the leads and the sales are people just feeling your passion. And that's another area maybe you can focus on is if someone asks you what your favorite destination is and you say it's Bermuda, share personal things you've done in Bermuda. What has made it special for you? That opens it up for them to share personal things. And it really shows your passion for travel. And people are attracted to authenticity and passion. And they want to know that if they're going to trust you with planning a vacation for them and for their family, that you're going to go to bat for them and you're really going to take the time to listen and to
Yeah,
follow up.
we spoke earlier in the week, and we were talking about this, and it was interesting because COVID has been sort of a shared experience for the whole world population. I'm not sure there's ever been something like this that sort of people have had an experience with. Obviously, people have had different experiences and different impacts on them, but I mean, it is a shared global experience, which is completely unique. And I think that's something that, getting personal with how you've been through COVID, I think, is
Mhm.
something that can be powerful too.
Yeah, it's so true. And I've found during this period, people have opened up in ways they've not before. I feel like I know more about our travelers than ever before, and they know more about me than ever before too. And there's an even playing field, like you said. Sometimes there might be intimidation factor when you're approaching certain people or certain potential clients, but we all have this shared experience that we're going through, and it's
Yeah,
a starting
yeah,
place.
exactly. I'm not sure I mean, it hasn't been super positive, but it's definitely been a shared
Mhm.
experience. And I think, I mean, I'm sure everyone's having a similar experience. To me, is that when you're getting on these Zoom calls, a lot of people are asking, how's it going by you with COVID? And I think that's what I spoke about to you when we spoke on Tuesday to kick off the conversation. So
Yeah,
I think that's it's just important to point out.
yeah,
So we're gonna throw a poll up about virtual events, and we're getting used to using polls now. So
great.
we're gonna see how many people have started. Yep. Would you be interested in receiving visitors? So, yep, the poll's in progress right now.
Okay, great.
Um, so I mean, back to I want to ask you about the conversations again that you've had with
Yeah,
clients, particularly bringing up the sales question, because I know we are building relationships in these kind of events, and we are sort of moving things forward with clients and getting to know people better. But ultimately, there's the sales question is going to come up. And I'm wondering, is it you? Do you always make a concerted effort to let them bring up the sales question? Is it the opposite? Are you always bringing it up? Or are you just letting them know you're a travel advisor, and if they're interested, they can come to you? What's your process like?
Yeah. I find that for me, if you again show a sincere interest in the person you're speaking with and you're open with them and very forthcoming with information, I seldom ever have to make a sales pitch. I'm always just approached and asked after that conversation. So it's questions like, well, how would I be able to work with you? Or if I want to go to this destination, what are my next steps for booking? Um, it it just seems to happen organically, which I'm thankful for. But again, through my fundraising training, I can also be very aggressive in making asks. So I don't have a challenge with that. And I find more so when you're already engaged with travelers, there can sometimes be a hesitation to ask for the deposit or ask for the final, or especially now during COVID, it's so challenging with all these different terms and conditions and non-refundable payments. So I think that's where you have to be. And I find myself being more forthcoming about cost and payment because I think it's very important, again, being transparent. The minute the process is getting to a certain level, letting them know, okay, well, if you're thinking about moving forward, you just need to know right away, you're going to have to make full payment right away. It's non-refundable. We may want to talk about and consider travel insurance. So those are instances where, yes, I am very forthcoming and I'll often bring it up, just trying to be proactive because you don't want to get along a path and the person wasn't expecting to move that fast, and then you have a disconnect with, oh, I didn't realize that tomorrow I need to, authorize you to run this full payment for this cruise or hotel stay, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think those are two qualities that have come up on a lot of these sessions: is be transparent and be genuine as best you can. I think that's super important. Yeah, so I'm gonna grab a few more questions, and then I'm gonna get to the Halloween contest winner. But I do want to give people the opportunity to ask you as many questions as they can in the next 10 minutes or so. And a couple have come in that are interesting, and along the lines of what we were just speaking about. A guest attendee wants to know, what's the best way to talk to a client at the beginning of your relationship. They want to know if you touch upon travel right away, or you sort of gauge what their interests are and what their personality is like.
Mhm. I think typically with most interactions, one of the first questions is always, what do you do? Um, and then I'm honest and transparent about what I do. So I think it typically comes up pretty early on.
Mhm.
And in answering the question, it's not, I'm a travel advisor, and the next time you're thinking about travel, I'd love to plan your trip. It's, I'm a travel advisor. These are the types of trips I enjoy planning. And again, I find that when people know that you're in this industry, and especially now, there are lots of questions that follow. How are you doing? What got you into the industry? What destinations do you focus on? So I think the conversations evolve organically, and it can certainly be scary at first, especially when you don't know someone at all. But it unfolds naturally.
So this question is particularly relevant, I think, because of next week in the United States. But Debbie wants to know, and I think this probably goes beyond politics. But at your events, if conversations turn to politics, how do you handle it? Um, as well as when are you speaking them when you are speaking to them one on one, do you try to pivot away from politics? But I guess the
Mhm.
base of the question is, what when things go wrong, when maybe conversations take a left turn, what's your approach to those situations?
That's an excellent question. And I think you can't do this. You can't, like, see, not hear, not. You have to be the peacemaker. You have to be the diffuser. And fortunately, I haven't had many instances where this has happened. But again, in hosting these events, to like really drill in on that, in addition to you monitoring around, you want to have some people helping. You want to have members of your team or even family helping monitoring situations. And if you see some abrasiveness happening, you diffuse it. And to be specific, you can just go up to that person and say, I really wanted to talk to you about, so sorry to interrupt, but can I talk to you about this? Or can I show you this? Or I wanted you to meet this person. These are ways that don't seem insincere, but that you can break something up. And I think oftentimes guests will be forthcoming to you and tell you if they're having an issue with someone else, and then you can be really proactive in, again, diffusing, separating. But I think if you're diligent with your invitation process and knowing the guest, you can be proactive. But when it does happen in the course of an event, and I've had it happen in the course of an event, you just have to be professional, not react emotionally, listen to both sides, and just diffuse it.
Yeah, we spoke earlier in the week, and you mentioned that you had an incident at one of your events where there was, I mean, maybe, I think it was what you touched upon earlier. You had maybe a luxury cruise client at an ocean cruise event, and they said something, and I mean, yeah, just, I mean, so you could talk about how you handled that incident, and I guess just for more practical advice for the people on the call.
Yeah. So without being, I can't be too specific
Yeah,
about it, but it was a presentation format, and one of the guests asked a very pointed question about use of substances. I'll leave it at that on a cruise, and where these substances could be used or not. And it made people uncomfortable. It was a bit awkward, and we got through it. The question was asked again, so that kind of built things up more. But again, I tried not to react. The presenter was also very professional and said, we can take this question offline, and we always have to consider the comfort of all guests with whether it's smoking or anything else, how guests are going to be comfortable, and these are our policies. And then also, once the presentation was over, of course, I went up to that person, the presenter did as well, and it diffused. And the other guests were understanding. I mean, sure, there were comments about it. I managed them, but people understand that there are going to be frictions sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, anywhere you go in public at any event, and the travel industry I think, is super unique for the use of events, B2B, and I think
Mhm.
people realize what a large gathering of people can bring, and I think yeah, I mean, it's just job of the advisor to sort of deal with it. And I guess a good tip you mentioned is turning these largely public conversations privately seems to be a good way to
Mhm.
diffuse hot feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I do want to get to the Halloween winner, but I want to give you some time to wrap up. But one question came in twice, and I do want to get it because this has sort of been a common question for a lot of the advisors who have spoken to the audience here. And I guess people are wondering, are you in the community that charges a planning fee? And you don't have to sort of expand on it, but I guess just for their knowledge, is that something you do?
Yeah, I certainly do, and I certainly almost always have. I think it's very important. And I think, especially now during COVID, we've revamped our fees and been even more explicit in public about it. And the reception has been very positive. Um, even though we've charged fees all the time, it wasn't for everything. And so I did have reservations with instituting fees for hotel bookings and for villa stays. But again, it came from a place of being honest with the guests and really thinking through with my team how we position this. And the narrative really was, at this time, well, the narrative was, we have always prided ourselves in the service that we provide and the training that goes into that service, the time, and we request that that time and expertise is compensated. And then now, especially during this time where revenue streams are very challenged, fees are really the only immediate revenue stream that we have now. And we want them to support our business. And we put it forward as, we really want to work with you. We are so pleased and humbled that you have approached us. and this is a partnership with Planning Your Travel. And we really want you to be part of our business and support us. And the overwhelming response has been, we get it. We really want to support your business, and we're happy to pay the engagement fee. And often the travelers will ask first
Yeah.
because they'll realize. So it's gone over really well.
So we're gonna wrap up, but I want to say thank you so much, Kareem. You've really given us a lot of thought to think about today, and I think it's a fairly unique topic that a lot of advisors don't have in their head when they're starting out, especially now when in-person gatherings seem almost impossible. But clearly, there are opportunities there. But I want to give you a couple minutes if you have any final thoughts, any advice that maybe we didn't get to for advisors who are looking into doing these events. And again, I want to say thank you so much for lending us your time today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun. And I thank everyone for tuning in and listening. And I would encourage those that have not done events before to try it out, start small. And those that have done events, rethink your events, think about how you can make them more creative or more engaging. And I'm here, I'm around, I'm part of this community of advisors, and I'm so grateful. When I started, the mentors I had and more experienced advisors that really helped me. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. So if people want to follow up, please don't hesitate to. And I mean that sincerely, because we all have our own process with our comfort level of doing things. And sometimes we just need, a little bit of encouragement. And sometimes we need more. And I'm happy to be a resource in both ways if I can.
Yeah, and I think I do. And again, I wanted to add, this has been a great conversation. And I'm hoping we can have you back sometime in the future too, especially when COVID sort of rolls down. And hopefully everyone will see each other at an in-person event sometime in
I,
the future.
I know I
So I
miss.
do want to, yeah, I do want to announce the winners. I'm hoping the marketing team at TMR can bring up the video. So I have 3 names here, and I have 2 honorable mentions. The first honorable mention is going to be Jana Huntley. Can we get her video up? Is that doable? All right. Let's see. Okay. Did we get Jana up? Is that working?
Sorry, Dan, I have to go through because I didn't get.
All right. Well, so Jana Huntley was an honorable mention, and we also have Gwen DeWatt. Well, this is Jana. I got a note that says Jana had an original Mike Myers originally as her background. She's switched to a resort area. Oh, there's Jana. Or there's Gwen. This is Gwen, who's the other honorable mention. And then the winner is going to be Lisa Hansen. Let's try to find Lisa Hansen.
Oh, congratulations.
Congratulations, Lisa. Lisa's going to get a free subscription to our Maestro series. And yeah, we hope you enjoy it. I want to say again, thank you to Kareem. Thank you to everyone who attended today. We're going to be back in 2 weeks, and hope to see you guys then. But otherwise, hope you have a tremendous weekend, a great Halloween, and everyone stay safe. All right.
Super. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.